You won't believe what just happened in the Senate today. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez openly mocked Senator John Neely Kennedy's education stance right to his face. But his response wasn't just an answer. It was a masterclass in dignity, wit, and pure Southern intellect. The room fell silent, social media exploded, and you're about to find out why. What was supposed to be a routine Senate hearing, with lawmakers, education experts, and cameras gathered to discuss public education, reform, turned into something else entirely. Everyone expected heated debates and sharp arguments, but no one saw what was coming. The Senate chamber was steeped in expectant silence, broken only by the rustle of papers. AOC, with her sleek black hair tied high and eyes flashing like fire, sat upright, gripping her pen, ready to make her mark. She had come prepared not just with education data, but with the sharpness that made her a household name as a progressive icon. AOC knew every word she spoke could ignite millions on social media, where she has over 13 million followers. Today, she was determined to turn this hearing into a statement, not just about policy, but about her opposition to the conservative ideology Kennedy represented. The hearing had already heated up when Kennedy, with his warm, drawling voice, finished his remarks. He defended his stance on cutting federal spending, arguing that schools need efficiency, not bloated budgets. With a slight smile, he reasoned that parents should have the freedom to choose their children's schools, rather than being tied to a bureaucratic public system. His words, though simple, were incisive, earning nods from some senators. But AOC couldn't stay quiet. She felt Kennedy's position wasn't just conservative, it overlooked children in struggling communities where public schools are their only hope. AOC stood, requesting to speak. Cameras swung toward her, lights illuminating her resolute face. With a voice brimming with energy, she began without hesitation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're discussing the future of millions of children, but I wonder if we should take seriously opinions that seem drawn from front porch anecdotes rather than actual education research. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on Kennedy. A faint smile crossed her lips, not quite sarcastic, but a challenge. It's hard to believe someone can lead this debate when their knowledge seems to come from campfire chats in Louisiana, not from verified pages of scholarship. The room erupted for a moment. A few AOC supporters clapped and laughed, while some conservative senators shook their heads, muttering dissent. Education experts exchanged curious glances, awaiting what came next. AOC, brimming with confidence, criticized Kennedy's support for education budget cuts, calling it a blow to vulnerable communities. Her words were crisp, each sentence crafted to go viral on social media. For AOC, this wasn't just a debate about education. It was a chance to draw a clear line between progressive and conservative ideologies. Her retort aimed to undermine Kennedy's credibility before the public, especially the young viewers watching the live stream. Kennedy remained calm, tilting his head slightly as he observed. Though his allies seemed uneasy, he showed no emotion. On social media, comments exploded. AOC just landed a punch. How will Kennedy hit back? Concluding her remarks, AOC stated clearly, "We need real solutions, not fairy tales." She sat down, her eyes locked on Kennedy, as if inviting him into the confrontation she had just ignited. The Senate chamber fell into a tense, heavy silence, as if the air had been compressed by AOC's sharp jab. All eyes turned to John Neely Kennedy, who sat still in his chair, unruffled in his dark blue suit and deep red tie. He looked like a Louisiana farmer about to share a story on a porch. But behind that unassuming exterior was a razor-sharp mind, honed at Vanderbilt, Virginia Law School, and Oxford. Kennedy was no stranger to being underestimated for his Southern drawl, and today he was ready to turn his opponent's mockery into an opportunity. Kennedy leaned slightly forward, his index finger-tapping gently on the wooden table, a small habit those familiar with him knew signaled intense focus. His eyes, bright and piercing, scanned the room before settling on AOC. There was no trace of anger or unease. Instead, a faint smile flickered, as if he'd just heard a joke not worth taking seriously. The cameras, with their knack for capturing moments, zoomed in on his face, catching every detail, from the slight wrinkles at the corners of his eyes to the glint of his thin glasses. Kennedy's silence was like a weapon, holding the room in suspense. Some conservative senators, like Ted Cruz a few seats away, smirked slightly, as if they knew he was gearing up for a formidable counterstrike. AOC's supporters, on the other hand, remained confident, believing her jab had put Kennedy on the ropes. An education expert in the guest section stopped taking notes, looking up, curious about how Kennedy would respond. Even Senate staff, usually busy with tasks, paused, their eyes glued to him. Kennedy's silence wasn't surrender. It was a calculated pause, like a boxer waiting for the perfect moment to land a decisive blow. In Kennedy's mind, AOC's attack wasn't just a personal insult. It was an attempt to diminish not only him, but the values he stood for. Everyday Americans, workers in Louisiana, people underestimated for their accents or hometowns. He knew the room, and the millions watching via livestream, weren't just waiting for a clever comeback, but a statement of dignity. With experience from Oxford debates and Louisiana campaign trails, Kennedy understood his response would shape not just this debate, but his public image. He took a deep breath. His fingers stopped tapping, and his hand slowly rested on the microphone. This small action made the room hold its breath, as if sensing a historic moment was about to unfold. Kennedy, with decades-honed composure, wasn't one to be easily defeated in a war of words. He knew his response needed to be not only sharp, but also elevate the debate, returning it to the core issue, the future of American education. Kennedy tilted his head slightly, his eyes still locked on AOC, but not with hostility. Instead, it was the look of a teacher about to instruct, of someone who knew truth and dignity would prevail. The audience felt the weight of the moment, and journalists, pens poised, were ready to capture every word. A few neutral senators exchanged glances, as if realizing this confrontation was about to take an unexpected turn. With his deliberate silence, Kennedy had turned AOC's mockery into a springboard for a response that would defend not just his honor, but serve as a lesson in how a true statesman should act. With slow motion, Kennedy adjusted his microphone. The chandelier's light glinted off his thin glasses, highlighting his sharp yet calm eyes. AOC, seated across from him, maintained her confidence, but a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes, as if she sensed her attack might have sparked an unforeseen response. Kennedy cleared his throat, a small but clear sound breaking the silence. He began, his warm southern drawl resonating like a slow-flowing river, each word carefully chosen, sharp as a blade. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I grew up in Louisiana, where folks do tell stories on porches, as you said. But I also studied at Vanderbilt, Virginia and Oxford, where I learned that wisdom isn't about showing off. It's about using it to help others." The room fell silent, save for the frantic scribbling of journalists' pens. He paused, letting his words sink in. A faint smile crossed his face, not sarcastic but confident, like someone who knew they held the upper hand. "I'm not here to argue about folklore or degrees," he continued, his tone calm but weighty. "I'm here for the kids in Louisiana, in the Bronx, across America. Kids who need an education that lifts them up, not fancy words to please a social media crowd." His words were an arrow aimed at AOC's strategy, wrapped in sincerity. The audience began to react. A few conservative senators in the back nodded in approval, their eyes gleaming with pride. Some of AOC's supporters, who had chuckled earlier, now sat pensive, hands gripping their chairs. Education experts in the guest section exchanged glances, as if realizing Kennedy wasn't just defending his honor, but reshaping the debate. Kennedy, with the finesse of someone seasoned in prestigious lecture halls, pivoted to policy. "We could argue all day about who studied where," he said, his tone now carrying a touch of wit. But that won't help a single kid in a crumbling school. I want parents to have the power to choose the best school for their children, not be stuck in a bureaucratic system. If you call that folklore, I call it common sense. His words weren't just a rebuttal, they were a call to action, reaching everyone from the chamber to phone screens. He leaned forward, his voice growing deeper. In Louisiana, we learn you don't need to shout to be right. Dignity isn't something you flaunt, it's something you show through action. This was a final jab, not just at AOC, but at the noisy, political culture where shock value often overshadows substance. The room erupted in applause, not only from conservative allies but also from some neutral onlookers swept up by his authenticity and logic. AOC, still sitting upright, tried to maintain a composed expression, but her lips tightened slightly, a subtle sign of surprise. She hadn't expected Kennedy, with his folksy demeanor, to turn her mockery into a political lesson. Some of her supporters in the corner of the room exchanged anxious glances, while others began typing on their phones, likely posting defenses of her on social media. Journalists, pens at the ready, scribbled every word, recognizing this moment, would soon dominate headlines. Kennedy, after finishing, sat down, his gaze still calm, as if he'd just done something routine. But the room was transformed. The applause faded, leaving a weighty silence, as if everyone was processing what they'd witnessed. Cameras panned to AOC, awaiting her reaction, but she only gave a slight nod, her eyes flicking toward Kennedy as if reassessing her opponent. This moment wasn't just a personal victory for Kennedy. It was a statement about how a politician can respond without stooping to their opponent's level. He had turned AOC's mockery into a platform to speak on deeper values, wisdom, dignity, and responsibility to future generations. The room, though divided ideologically, couldn't deny the power of his words. And as Kennedy's eyes swept the chamber once more, everyone knew this confrontation was far from over. AOC, with her resilient nature, would not let it rest. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, petite but radiating fierce energy, felt the pressure from millions watching. Online comments exploded. Kennedy just scored big. Can AOC clap back? But AOC wasn't one to back down easily. Her eyes gleamed with determination, like a warrior ready for the next round. She brushed her sleeve, stood, and requested to speak, poised to reclaim the stage. Camera lights poured down, highlighting AOC's resolute face. She leaned toward the microphone, her sleek black hair tied high, swaying slightly as she began. Her voice, clear but forceful, rang out like a war drum, each syllable crafted to command attention. "Senator Kennedy," she started, her eyes locked on him, unwavering. "I don't doubt your journey from Louisiana to prestigious lecture halls, but policy isn't built on degrees. It's built on commitment to the most vulnerable." She paused, letting her words sink into the room, a slight but sharp smile flickering. The audience reacted instantly. AOC's supporters, scattered throughout the chamber, clapped enthusiastically, their eyes alight with renewed fire. Some conservative senators, who had nodded along with Kennedy, now furrowed their brows, sensing the strength in AOC's reclaiming of the narrative. Journalists, pens poised, scribbled furiously, recognizing this confrontation was escalating into an unrelenting battle of wits. AOC raised her hand, a gesture both forceful and controlled, like a conductor leading an orchestra. "What you call school choice sounds nice, but in reality, it leaves millions of kids in poor neighborhoods with underfunded schools," she said, her tone growing sharper. "When you talk about common sense, I wonder whose common sense? That of families who can afford private schools, or those struggling to ensure their kids get breakfast?" Her words weren't just a rebuttal. They were an indictment aimed at the conservative ideology Kennedy represented while stirring the emotions of viewers watching. She took a small step forward, her eyes sweeping the room as if speaking directly to each person. "We don't need solutions that sound good on paper but abandon the kids who need quality public schools the most," she continued, her voice now carrying a hint of urgency. "I come from the Bronx, where schools are a lifeline. I'm fighting not to score points, but to ensure no child is left behind. Her words struck a chord with her supporters, and applause erupted again, this time louder, from both the audience in the room and those watching via livestream. In AOC's mind, this was a chance to reframe the debate. She knew Kennedy had turned her initial jab into a platform, but she refused to be shaken. With her oratory skills honed through years of activism and her social media prowess, AOC aimed to bring the confrontation back to its core, equity in education. She wanted the audience to see that behind her fiery style was a deep commitment to marginalized communities. She stood there, eyes locked on Kennedy, as if challenging him to face the reality she had just laid bare. Kennedy, seated across from her, maintained his calm demeanor, but his eyes now held a hint of weariness. He tilted his head slightly, as if reassessing his opponent. A few of his allies nearby exchanged glances, recognizing that AOC was not easily subdued. The education experts previously impressed by Kennedy now turned to AOC, scribbling notes at a faster pace. AOC, sensing the audience's support, concluded her remarks with a powerful statement. "We need policies that put kids first, not theories that sound nice but ring hollow," she said, her tone both forceful and sincere. "If you want to debate, bring real solutions, not just pretty stories from Louisiana." She sat down, her eyes still fixed on Kennedy, as if inviting him to continue the fight. The room erupted in applause, especially from her supporters, while some neutral onlookers nodded slightly, impressed by her resilience. The cameras panned to Kennedy, awaiting his response. He sat still, his hand resting lightly on the table, his eyes quietly observing AOC. A small smile flickered across his lips, not mocking, but as if acknowledging that his opponent was formidable. The livestream audience buzzed with comments, like "AOC just threw a counterpunch" and "What's Kennedy's next move?" Journalists, phones in hand, began posting initial updates, predicting this moment would dominate headlines. The Senate chamber's atmosphere felt charged after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's fiery counterattack. The applause from her supporters faded, leaving a space filled with anticipation, with all eyes on John Neely Kennedy. AOC, her eyes still blazing, sat upright like a warrior who had just landed a decisive blow and was waiting for her opponent's response. But Kennedy, with the calm of a quiet river, was in no rush. He gently placed his hand on the table, his sharp but composed eyes scanning the room like someone weighing each stone before building a bridge. Kennedy rose slowly, his movements deliberate, like a Louisiana farmer stepping into a field after rain. The camera lights illuminated his face, highlighting the faint wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, marks of a man who had faced countless challenges. He adjusted his microphone, a small action that silenced the room completely. A slight smile, not arrogant but confident, crossed his lips. When he spoke, his warm, resonant voice, like a church bell on a quiet morning, commanded instant attention. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he began, his eyes fixed on her, not with hostility, but like a teacher about to impart a lesson. "I hear what you're saying about the Bronx, about kids who need good schools. I agree. We must put kids first. But I come from Louisiana, where we know throwing money at a problem doesn't always fix it." His words, simple yet incisive, were like a velvet-wrapped arrow aimed at AOC's argument, without resorting to personal attacks. The room stirred. A few conservative senators in the back nodded, their eyes gleaming with pride. AOC's supporters, previously energized, grew quieter, as if feeling the weight of Kennedy's words. Journalists, phones in hand, typed rapidly, sensing this moment would soon go viral. Kennedy raised one hand, a gentle gesture signaling he wasn't done. "We could debate policy all day," he said, his tone now carrying a hint of wit, like a storyteller by a fireplace. "But I believe the best way to help kids isn't with fancy words or grand plans, but by giving parents a choice, ensuring schools work efficiently, and letting teachers teach without being bound by regulations. His words were not just a rebuttal, they were an invitation, reaching everyone from the chamber to families back home. He turned to AOC, his gaze still calm but deeply persuasive. "You're right, we need to protect vulnerable kids. But protecting them doesn't mean clinging to a system that's failed too many. In Louisiana, we learned you don't fix a broken house by repainting the walls." The room erupted in applause, not just from conservatives, but also from some neutral onlookers, swept up by his logic and sincerity. An education expert in the guest section gave a slight smile, as if acknowledging that Kennedy had just made a nearly irrefutable point. AOC, still sitting upright, tilted her head slightly, her eyes now carrying a hint of caution. She hadn't expected Kennedy, with his folksy style, to respond with such sharpness and grace, turning the debate into a dialogue about shared values. Some of her supporters began typing on their phones, likely posting defenses of her, but the room was clearly leaning toward Kennedy. Kennedy concluded with a weighty statement. "We're not here to bicker for fame," he said, his voice low but resonant. "We're here to build a better future for kids. If we can agree on that, I believe we can find a way." He sat down, his eyes sweeping the room as if he'd just completed a duty. Applause rang out, strong and sustained, from both allies, and those previously neutral. AOC, her expression still composed, gave a slight nod, but her eyes betrayed a reluctant respect. The cameras panned, capturing the moment as journalists began drafting headlines. "Kennedy closes debate with dignity." On social media, comments flooded in, many praising Kennedy for staying calm and refocusing the debate. After John Neely Kennedy's final remarks, but online, the atmosphere exploded like a wildfire. The clash between Kennedy and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez quickly became the focus of millions. Video clips of the debate, from AOC's sharp jab to Kennedy's composed response, spread at lightning speed on social media, where AOC reigns as a star with over 13 million followers. Opinions split sharply. Her supporters quickly posted to defend her stance, emphasizing that her counterattack targeted Kennedy's conservative policies, not him personally. One user wrote, "AOC is right. We need investment in public schools, not Kennedy's outdated ideas." Another account, with thousands of likes, shared a clip of her speech with the caption, "She's fighting for Bronx kids, unafraid to face anyone." These posts, full of fervor, rallied AOC's fans, especially younger ones who see her as a symbol of political change. But Kennedy, with his folksy charm and formidable calm, garnered strong support too. Conservative and neutral accounts praised how he turned AOC's mockery into a lesson in dignity. One user wrote, "Kennedy doesn't need to shout to win, he just taught the world how to debate." A 30-second clip of Kennedy saying, "We're not here to bicker for fame," was shared tens of thousands of times, with comments like, "This is the politician we need." Kennedy's fans, especially from southern states, posted about how he represented those underestimated for their accents or origins, making him a symbol of authenticity. Influencers jumped in, amplifying the event. A young political commentator, with a large following, posted on X, "AOC brought energy, but Kennedy brought wisdom. He reminded us politics isn't a stage." Meanwhile, a progressive influencer countered, "AOC speaks for the forgotten. Kennedy may be calm, but his policies don't help the Bronx." This divide, far from cooling the debate, made it a topic everywhere, from family chats to online forums. AOC, aware of the online reaction, posted to clarify her stance. "Today, I fought for kids who need quality public schools. This isn't about individuals, it's about our future." She attached a clip of her counter-speech. The post quickly gained thousands of likes, especially from loyal fans, but also faced critical comments suggesting she went too far with her jab at Kennedy. One user wrote, "AOC, you're strong, but Kennedy won this time by not falling into drama." Though not the response she hoped for, it kept her at the center of the conversation. Journalists, from major outlets to independent news sites, began publishing analyses. One online article was titled, "Kennedy versus AOC, When Dignity Meets Passion." Another, from a progressive paper, argued that AOC had ignited the public education debate, though Kennedy scored points with his composure. These articles, shared thousands of times, amplified the event's intensity, turning it into a cultural moment far beyond the Senate chamber. The social media frenzy gradually subsided, but the aftershocks of the clash between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and John Neely Kennedy lingered like a breeze through conversations, from dinner tables to online forums. The Senate debate, initially just a hearing on education reform, transcended the packed chamber to become a cultural milestone, a mirror reflecting how Americans view politics, dignity, and difference. As the cameras shut off and the audience left the room, the story of AOC and Kennedy was more than a verbal sparring match. It was a reminder of deeper values, of how to face conflict while maintaining respect. AOC, with her fiery passion and fierce commitment, represented a generation hungry for change. Raised in the Bronx, where public schools often lack resources, she brought to the hearing an authentic perspective shaped by personal experience. Her passion, amplified through social media, inspired millions of young people who see her as a champion challenging the status quo. Though her initial jab may have been seen as overstepping, her resilient counterattack proved she's not just a politician chasing the spotlight, but a warrior fighting for forgotten communities. This confrontation, while not an outright victory, for her solidified her image as a voice that cannot be silenced. Kennedy, in contrast, embodied a rare political style in the noisy age of social media. With his warm Southern drawl and composure honed at Vanderbilt, Virginia, and Oxford, he turned an insult into an opportunity to speak on timeless values. Wisdom without showboating, dignity proven through action. He represented everyday Americans, often underestimated for their accents or origins. His call for cooperation over conflict resonated with those yearning for a less divided politics, where ideas trump drama. This event, with all its drama, left a profound lesson about facing conflict. AOC, with her explosive energy, reminded us that politics is a fire that must be kindled to drive change. Kennedy, with his calm, proved that true strength sometimes lies in restraint, in the ability to listen and respond without belittling an opponent. Both, in their own ways, brought to life a debate about education, turning it into a broader dialogue about responsibility, fairness, and hope for future generations. The story of the clash between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and John Neely Kennedy in the 2025 Senate hearing was not just a political sparring match, but a mirror reflecting core values applicable to life in America today. In a deeply divided society where debates often devolve into personal attacks, this story offers a profound lesson on handling conflict with respect and effectiveness. AOC, with her fierce passion and commitment to defending vulnerable communities like the Bronx, showed the power of speaking out for fairness, especially when she countered with data and personal stories about underfunded public schools. Kennedy, with his calm and sharp reasoning, proved that dignity and sincerity, like his call for cooperation over bickering, can rise above jabs like the Louisiana folklore quip. The social media explosion reflected how networks amplify conflict, but also showed Americans' hunger for meaningful dialogue. The lesson from this story: in life, whether at work, school, or in the community, we can learn from both AOC and Kennedy to handle conflict. Combine AOC's passion, standing up for what you believe in, like her fight for poor children, with Kennedy's calm, listening, and responding with reason over emotion. Instead of personal attacks, like AOC's initial jab, focus on solutions, like Kennedy's push for school choice. In a polarized America, turn debates into opportunities for understanding, as both ultimately aimed for a shared goal: the future of children. Share your ideas with sincerity, and you'll build bridges instead of walls.